Imagine standing outside in ancient Egypt at noon. The sun is directly above you. There is almost nowhere to hide. The ground is so hot that even the air seems to shimmer. Your clothes are sticking to your body. Your mouth is dry, and every few minutes, you desperately want water. Now imagine this isn't just one hot afternoon. This is your life. No air conditioning, no electric fan, no refrigerator, no cold shower whenever you want one, no climate-controlled building waiting nearby. Just the Nile, mudbrick, linen, shade, and one of the harshest climates on Earth. And yet, ancient Egyptians didn't simply survive here. They built cities. They farmed. They traded. They worked. They built enormous temples. They built pyramids. They created one of the most powerful civilizations the ancient world had ever seen. So how did ordinary Egyptians survive the heat? The answer is surprisingly simple. They didn't try to defeat the desert. They learned how to work with it. Start with the place where you spend most of your life, your home. Imagine walking through the streets of an ancient Egyptian settlement. Outside, the sunlight is brutal. But then you step through the doorway. Suddenly, the world feels different. The room is darker. The sunlight is blocked. The walls are thick. The windows are limited. And the temperature inside can feel much more comfortable than the blazing world outside. This wasn't luck. The building itself was part of the cooling strategy. Many Egyptian homes were built from mudbrick. And mudbrick has an interesting property. It doesn't heat up and transfer heat as quickly as some thinner materials. So when the outside wall is being hammered by the sun, the interior can remain relatively protected. Think of it like a giant thermal barrier. The desert is outside. Your family is inside. And the wall is standing between you and the heat. But there was another weapon. One that required absolutely no technology. Shade. Because in extreme heat, sometimes the best cooling system is simply not standing in the sun. People could work in shaded areas, walk through covered spaces, stay indoors during the hottest part of the day, and take advantage of the cooler hours in the morning and evening. This changed something incredibly important. The Egyptians didn't have to make the entire day comfortable. They only had to organize their lives around the uncomfortable parts. And that idea becomes even more interesting when we look at their buildings. Because Egyptians understood something every modern air conditioner does. Moving air matters. Imagine you're standing inside a building. You're protected from the sun, but the air is still hot. So what do? You make the air move. Some Egyptian architecture used structures known as malqaf, or windcatchers. Picture a tall opening rising above a building. Wind moves across the roof. The structure catches that moving air and directs it downward. No electricity, no motor, no spinning fan. The building itself is doing the work. The Egyptians were essentially turning the wind into a natural ventilation system, and they weren't finished, because there was another thing they could use: water, not just for drinking, for cooling. Imagine a clay jar sitting inside an Egyptian house. The clay is porous. Tiny amounts of water can move toward the surface. When air passes over the damp surface, some of that water evaporates, and evaporation removes heat. The result? The water inside the container can become cooler than the surrounding air. It isn't an ancient refrigerator, but in a world without refrigeration, even a little cooling could be incredibly useful. And this is where something ordinary, like pottery, became part of the survival system. But the Egyptians didn't only cool their homes, they also had to cool their bodies. And that brings us to clothing. You might think that living in a desert means wearing as little clothing as possible, but there's a problem. The sun itself can be brutal against exposed skin. So instead, Egyptians used lightweight linen. Linen is breathable, it's relatively light, and loose clothing allows air to move around the body. So instead of thinking of clothing as something that simply covers you, think of it as a portable layer of shade. The right clothing could protect the body from direct sunlight while still allowing ventilation. And that was extremely useful, because the Egyptians couldn't control the temperature. But they could control how much sunlight reached their skin. Still, none of these tricks solves the biggest problem: water. Heat makes the human body lose water. And without enough replacement, things can become dangerous very quickly. For the Egyptians, one answer was obvious: the Nile. The river was more than a source of water. It was the foundation of Egyptian civilization. It supported agriculture, provided fish, connected settlements, moved goods, and made permanent life possible in a landscape surrounded by desert. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been a completely different place. But surviving heat wasn't simply about finding water. You had to manage it, store it, transport it, protect it, and make sure people had access to it when they needed it. And then there was food, because your body doesn't run on water alone. Bread, fish, vegetables, dates, and yes, beer. But ancient Egyptian beer wasn't exactly the same thing as the cold drink you might imagine today. It was commonly consumed and could provide both liquid and calories. Workers could even receive beer as part of their rations. So food and hydration weren't completely separate problems. They were part of one larger system. Keep the body fueled, keep it hydrated, keep it protected from the sun, and avoid unnecessary exposure to the worst heat. But there was one more trick: time. Imagine a farmer waking up just after sunrise. The temperature is still relatively manageable. He starts working. The sun climbs higher. The heat increases. But by then, some of the hardest work is already finished. Then comes the hottest part of the day. And instead of continuing to work at maximum intensity, people could rest or seek shade. Later, as the sun begins to fall, activity can increase again. The schedule itself becomes a survival tool. This is something modern people sometimes forget. You don't always need better technology. Sometimes you need better timing. The Egyptians couldn't lower the temperature, so they changed when they exposed themselves to it. And that idea appears everywhere. Their houses adapted, their clothing adapted, their work schedules adapted, their food systems adapted, their settlements adapted. Everything was built around the environment. And then night arrived. This completely changed the equation. The sun disappeared, the desert began cooling, the sky became dark, and suddenly, the roof became useful. Flat rooftops could become places to sit, places to relax, and in hot conditions, even places to sleep. During the day, the house protected you from the sun. At night, the roof allowed you to take advantage of the cooler air. The same building could serve a completely different purpose depending on the time. And that's the fascinating part. The house wasn't fighting the climate. It was working with the climate. But none of this happened because one Egyptian suddenly invented the perfect cooling system. It was much slower. People observed. They experimented. They noticed where the wind moved. They noticed which rooms stayed cooler. They noticed which materials behaved differently. They noticed when the heat became dangerous. And then those observations became habits. Habits became traditions. And traditions were passed from parents to children. A child learned when to work, where to find water, what to wear, where to find shade, how to use the house, how to survive the hottest part of the day. And eventually, that child taught the next generation. Thousands of years before weather apps, before temperature sensors, before modern climate control, people were already reading their environment. The desert was constantly giving them information, and they learned to listen. Now imagine an ordinary Egyptian standing outside at midday. The sun is almost directly overhead. The ground is scorching. The horizon is shimmering, but he's not helpless. He's wearing light clothing. He has access to water. His home provides shade. His community understands the rhythm of the day, and the Nile is nearby. He hasn't defeated the desert. He has simply learned how to live inside it. And that's what makes ancient Egypt so fascinating. They weren't immune to heat. They weren't somehow stronger than everyone else. They simply understood the rules. Thick walls could slow the transfer of heat. Shade could protect the body. Moving air could make a room more comfortable. Evaporation could cool water. Linen could provide protection without trapping excessive heat. Work could be timed around the temperature, and rooftops could become useful once the sun disappeared. None of these inventions sounds revolutionary by itself, but together, they created a survival system. And that survival system helped people build a civilization in a place where the environment seemed determined to make life difficult. We remember the pyramids. We remember the temples. We remember the golden masks. But behind every monument, there were ordinary people. People who woke up in the heat. People who worked in the heat. People who carried water. People who grew food. People who traveled beneath the sun. People who had to sleep at night and wake up to do it all again. They didn't conquer the desert. They learned its rules. And perhaps that's the most impressive part. Because sometimes the greatest survival technology isn't a machine. It's understanding your environment well enough to stop fighting it. The ancient Egyptians didn't make the desert disappear. They simply learned how to live inside it. And that lesson is thousands of years old. If you enjoyed this journey into ancient Egypt, subscribe to the Ancient Egyptians for more stories about how people lived, survived, worked, and adapted thousands of years ago. And I'll see you in the next one.